Now I want to ask you a simple question, a simple, logical question. Would a country committing genocide plead with the civilian population it is supposedly targeting to get out of harm's way? Would we tell them, get out, if we want to commit genocide? We're trying to get them out. And Hamas is trying to keep them in. And this charge is so baseless. The comparison to genocide, wholesale slaughter of populations. What, did the Nazis ask the Jews to leave, kindly leave, go out? Did others, you want me to name all the genocidal leaders of history? Just go one by one. Did anyone do this? Did they say, get out so we can come in? Of course not.
Benjamin Netanyahu recently spoke at the United Nations General Assembly in September. He defended Israel's military actions in Gaza and vowed to finish the job in a very final solution kind of way.
We're not done yet. The final elements, the final remnants of Hamas are holed up in Gaza City. They vow to repeat the atrocities of October 7th again and again and again, no matter how diminished their forces. That is why Israel must finish the job. That is why we want to do so as fast as possible.
He also sharply criticized many Western countries for recognizing Palestinian statehood. As Israel is one of the most important perches on the doorstep of West Asia, it is crucial to U.S. and Israeli geopolitical interests to maintain the colonial position of the Palestinians. This recognition by Western countries of Palestinian statehood may seem like a nice gesture at first, but it is far little too late. Many of these countries were themselves funding Israel's operations in Gaza. It is an attempt by Western countries to wash Palestinian bloods off of their own hands. And in protest to Netanyahu's remarks, the majority of UN delegates walked out of the General Assembly, showing how isolated Israel is in terms of international politics. Netanyahu has unceasingly spouted lies and disinformation about the Palestinians' resistance to their extermination.
So the truth has been turned on its head. Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organization whose charter calls for the murder of all Jews on the planet. This genocidal organization is given a pass. It's barely mentioned.
He's tried to make Israel and Jews as a whole seem like the victims of a grand conspiracy of alleged anti-Semitism from their geopolitical neighbors and rivals, colonial subjects, all the way from the International Criminal Court to the students protesting at universities in America. He repeats the lie about Hamas using civilians as human shields and as props in a propaganda war against Israel. Let me explain why this is insane first. There is no credible evidence that suggests Hamas is using human shields. Same with the Hamas tunnels and civilian towers. However, there is a plethora of evidence showing that the IDF uses civilians in this exact way, proving once again that every accusation is actually a confession when it comes to Israel. Israel targets human beings, children, shoots them in the skulls, and then calls Hamas terrorists. They drop bombs on civilian tents and set them on fire. They are exterminating the Palestinians, all the while Netanyahu makes false claims about Hamas conducting this extremely effective propaganda campaign from the inside of a concentration camp. Somehow, Hamas is the genocidal entity in this equation, which is just nonsense. Somehow, Hamas is both weak and very strong, which reminds me of another fascist regime and the groups that they targeted. He talks about nearly 700,000 Gazans moving to safe zones, where Israel drops leaflets warning them of their impending doom. They tell civilians to go to these designated safe areas and then bomb these safe areas. They lead them like cattle to slaughter. In the following clip, Netanyahu attempts to justify Israel's position by posing a sort of rhetorical question / hypophora about the Nazis.
Would a country committing genocide plead with the civilian population it is supposedly targeting to get out of harm's way? What, did the Nazis ask the Jews to leave, kindly leave, go out? Did others, you want me to name all the genocidal leaders of history? Just go one by one. Did anyone do this? Did they say, get out?
The point he's trying to make is that Israel is not committing a genocide, specifically because they have asked the Palestinians to get out and move first. That Hamas are the ones that want to keep the Palestinians there, which is true. Hamas, along with every civilian, man, woman, and child, want to stay. It is their home. It is their land, and they are being forcefully expelled and ethnically cleansed from their own home. They are being systematically targeted and destroyed. And his expected response to this logical question is, of course, a country conducting genocide wouldn't ask a group in question to move out of the way first. They would just kill them straight away. But it doesn't matter if they ask nicely first. We can see their intention very clearly, not only in the bombings and the attacks and the shootings, but also in the way that they are blocking humanitarian aid, not allowing any food to be let into Gaza. They are using starvation as a weapon. If we look at history, for example, the genocide of the Native Americans was done in waves. One strategy was to make concessions and deals with the natives where they would be granted some governorship over a piece of land that the settlers had already taken. The Land Ordinance of 1785 had established a national system for surveying and distributing land. And as one historian had noted, quote, under the May 1785 ordinance, Indian land would be auctioned off to the highest bidder. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787, albeit guaranteeing indigenous occupancy and title, set forth an evolutionary colonization procedure for annexation via military occupation, territorial status, and finally statehood. Conditions for statehood would be achieved when the settlers outnumbered the indigenous population, which in the cases of both the Mexican secession area and the Louisiana Purchase territory required decimation or forced removal of indigenous populations. In this U.S. system, unique among colonial powers, land became the most important exchange commodity for the accumulation of capital and building of the national treasury. To understand the genocidal policy of the United States government, the centrality of land sales in building the economic base of the U.S. wealth and power must be seen. Apologists for U.S. expansionism see the 1787 ordinance not as a reflection of colonialism, but rather as a means of, quote, reconciling the problem of liberty with the problem of empire, unquote, in historian Howard Lamar's words. Their lands would be taken from them piecemeal, bit by bit, until eventually they had nothing left and had been expelled permanently. This was done by the British, the French, the Spanish. Every European settler colonial state was built off of genocide and piecemeal destruction of the natives and their connection to their land. In 1907, Indian Territory was dissolved and the state of Oklahoma entered the Union. Under the Dawes and Curtis Acts, privatization of indigenous territories was imposed on half of all federal reservations, with a loss of 3/4 of the indigenous land base that still existed after decades of army attacks and wanton land grabs. Allotment continued until 1934, when it was halted by the Indian Reorganization Act, but the land taken was never restored, and its former owners were never compensated for their losses, leaving all of the indigenous people of Oklahoma, except the Osage Nation, without effective collective territories and many families with no land at all. And not only this, but they would also kidnap natives, put them in re-education camps, into schools, remove them from their language, their culture, and create second-class citizens and enslave them. U.S. history, as well as inherited indigenous trauma, cannot be understood without dealing with the genocide that the United States committed against indigenous peoples. From the colonial period through the founding of the United States and continuing in the 20th century, this has entailed torture, terror, sexual abuse, massacres, systematic military occupations, removals of indigenous peoples from their ancestral territories, and removals of indigenous children to military-like boarding schools. The absence of even the slightest note of regret or tragedy in the annual celebration of the U.S. independence betrays a deep disconnect in the consciousness of U.S. Americans. The apartheid system in Africa came about in a similar fashion, which you can actually go and check out a podcast that I did with some friends of mine where we talked about South Africa and its history, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. Native Africans were forced to leave. They were slaughtered and enslaved, and the colonists took their land and settled it. The European colonists created systems of oppression of the native populations through brutal subjugation and exploitation. Their land was partitioned to various groups. Borders were drawn haphazardly without regard to existing ethnic lines, which led to even more chaos. It is a tried and true strategy by the settler colonists to split up their indigenous subjects, their colonial subjects, so that the natives cannot form a united front against their imperial aggressors. It is easier for the indigenous to be conquered, expelled, and obliterated when they cannot defend themselves effectively, when they're divided. And this also led to the ending of the apartheid system because natives were able to eventually unite themselves in their resistance, with some groups being explicitly Marxist. Even if it led to a liberal government that exists in South Africa today, they still acquired a form of national liberation from the genocidal occupation. Chinese communists temporarily allied with the nationalists, the Kuomintang, and successfully drove out the Japanese occupying their country in the War of Japanese Aggression. The Chinese and Soviets also assisted the Koreans in liberating their country from the grips of Japanese imperialism and colonialism. And the DPRK is still fighting for national liberation of their country, where half of it has been under United States colonial occupation for over 50 years now at this point. The United States obtruded its military onto Korea 3 weeks after the Japanese surrender, having spilled not a single drop of blood for Korea's liberation. In contrast, Soviet forces had fought their way into Korea a full month before US forces arrived. The Soviet push into Manchuria and contiguous Korea and the spilled blood of Soviet soldiers in the campaign was one of the principal causes of Japan's surrender. The Korean national liberation struggle is a subject for another time, but suffice it to say, it is no wonder why the DPRK has shown significant solidarity with Palestinians struggling for independence from the Israeli colonial regime. They are fighting the same fight. And this same strategy is being used by splitting the colonial subjects against one another, is being employed by the United States on the Korean Peninsula to this very day. The Republic of Korea, South Korea, is a puppet government. It's a puppet state. Just like Israel, just like Ukraine. Now, I'm sure that scared off a lot of you, but to the rest of you that are still here, let's continue with Netanyahu's speech. He tried to paint Hamas as genocidal terrorists, citing their charter, which calls for the killing of Jews. Now, we're going to do a little empathy exercise. I know this is going to be hard for some of you, but I want you to imagine what it's like to be a Palestinian liberation fighter, or to be part of Hamas, or to be just a regular Palestinian man, woman, and child. If your entire life, your parents' lives, your grandparents' lives, your great-grandparents' lives were dominated by murderous violence and control by an ethno-nationalist entity specifically claiming to represent an entire religion, your view of that state claiming to represent that entire religion would most likely not be very gracious or favorable, because that's all the impression that you have is what you've lived under. You might even begin to hate people from this group, because all of your friends and family have died from their weapons and bombs in the name of their country, their God, their religion. And if you have lost your home, your family, your way of life to these people who treat you as a subhuman, and no other country in the world is going to intervene on your behalf to protect you, to defend you, you might even join a resistance group, because to you, lying down and taking the bayonet is worse than fighting for even a chance at freedom, at returning the favor. To you, fighting the empire, dying for your people is the most noble thing you can do, because you have no other choice. Because nonviolence does absolutely nothing. In the immortal words of Kwame Ture,
in order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none.
For Netanyahu and Israel in general, hating Palestinians is no accident. They hate them because of who they are, because of the material barrier to resources that they represent. They want to displace and remove Palestinians and destroy their homes and make room for their own because of many different things, mainly racism, capitalist market expansion, and colonialism. The land is the most important thing for them here. It doesn't matter what historical justification they can come up with, the main goal is colonization. And Israelis and many Zionists will openly justify their colonialism to your face. They'll say things like this, for example.
I don't care if you believe that Palestinians are indigenous to the land of Palestine. That does not mean they get to have their own country within the current country of Israel.
Openly admitting to their colonization, to the fact that they don't belong there, but they're taking the land anyway, because every place has been conquered. The people on the land can be killed and removed so that access to this land can generate further profits and gain strategic benefits and advantages for the larger empire in control here. The peculiarity of settler colonialism is that the goal is elimination of indigenous populations in order to make land available to settlers. That project is not limited to government policy, but rather involves all kinds of agencies, voluntary militias, and the settlers themselves acting on their own. Israel would not exist if the United States did not need it to exist. Former President Joe Biden has stated very plainly,
were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
And this was a very transparent expression of American imperialist foreign policy.
Here's where things stand today. Half the Houthi leadership in Yemen, gone. Yahya Sinwar in Gaza, gone. Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon, gone. The Assad regime in Syria, gone. Those militias in Iraq, well, they're still deterred. And their leaders, if they attack Israel, will also be gone. And for Iran's top military commanders and his top atomic bomb scientists, well, they're gone too.
That if America were to have political control of the Middle East, if it is to encircle China and Russia and the greater Asian continent effectively, then it needs bases. It needs aircraft carriers. It needs colonies.
You want to hear another one? Israel is accused of deliberately starving the people of Gaza when Israel is deliberately feeding the people of Gaza.
Netanyahu claims that Israel is deliberately feeding the people of Gaza instead of, using starvation as a weapon against the people of Gaza. He makes the claim that Israel has sent millions of tons of food aid.
Israel has let into Gaza more than 2 million tons of food and aid. That's 1 ton of aid for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. Nearly 3,000 calories per person per day. Some starvation policy.
But this inversion of reality does not somehow magically dissolve the fact that they are systematically starving everyone, destroying the whole city, destroying the entire Gaza Strip through any means at their disposal. In August 2025, the IPC confirmed that famine was present in Gaza City. Experts projected the famine would spread to the central and southern areas of Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis without an immediate ceasefire and the end of aid restrictions. Aid groups like the IRC, the International Rescue Committee, have described the food crisis as a man-made catastrophe created by Israeli policies that obstruct aid deliveries. The UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food has explicitly accused Israel of using starvation as a weapon. What Netanyahu doesn't mention is that occupation soldiers have been sniping people coming to these aid sites. Israel starves Gazans, sets up aid sites, sets up safe zones, and then shoots these people coming to these safe zones and aid sites. He makes the outrageous claim that their food aid constitutes nearly 3,000 calories per person per day. Some starvation policy, he says, with genocidal sass. If people aren't getting enough food, it's because Hamas is stealing it, according to Netanyahu. Hamas apparently steals it, hoards it, and sells it back at exorbitant prices to fund their war machine, according to these statistics he just made up for the speech. It's literally unbelievable. I don't know if you are getting that here. The level of complete and utter nonsense that this man vomits into a microphone is ridiculous. It's so cynical the way that this man lies and inverts reality, fabricating information and accusations about a starving population whole cloth. And there are people who believe this. There are people who actually take what this man says at face value. People with no political or media literacy, whose judgment is clouded by racism, white supremacy, and Zionist propaganda, usually Americans. This speech is basically one giant propaganda stunt to refute credible and substantive accusations against the criminal regime of Israel, to slap the United Nations in the face, and to make a mockery of all life. The discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and entombment in mines of the Aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, the turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of blackskins, signaled the rosy dawn of the era of capitalist production. These idyllic proceedings are the chief moments of prior accumulation. Well, that's it for today, guys. If you like what I'm doing here and want to support me, I will leave the link to my Patreon in the description. There are different tiers that you can donate at for as low as, I think, $2 or $5 or something like that. And if you want to do a one-time donation, you can donate to my coffee. Or if you want more long-form articles to read, and also these videos can be found here as well, you can subscribe to my Substack for free or for money. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.